to cover before we get started. So the meeting's being held under the local authorities flexibility local authority meetings regulations, which means that the decisions made in this committee have the same standing and validity as if they were being made in City Hall. In response to the regulations, the council has produced a set of virtual meetings procedure rules, which are available on the website, and these are the rules that we'll be following for the meeting. So members of the public who've submitted public forum statements, your statements have been received and circulated. Those of you who have indicated that you wish to speak will be called at the appropriate point. Just a word of experience that we found from the previous meetings is that the YouTube webcast can lag the actual Zoom meeting. So turn the YouTube off would be my advice when you're speaking. Members of the public who are watching, you'll see different people on the screen during the course of the meeting, but just to reassure you, only myself and the other councillors will be the ones making the decision on each application. And members of the committee, please ensure you're muted when you're not speaking, that when you've spoken, please remute yourself. And if you wish to speak, please remember to use the raise hand function in Zoom. It's much easier to manage that way. And then when you've had your turn, put your hand down as well. Is also helpful. If you need to leave the meeting for whatever reason, for technical issues or whatever, then please try and let us know. And when we come to the vote, as we've done in the previous meetings, it will be a named vote where we'll go through each person in turn and I'll ask you to say if you're for, against or abstaining on the vote. So moving to the second item on the agenda is the apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies?
Yes, Chair. Apologies from Councillor Richard Eddy. Thank you.
And Councillor Bowden-Jones is also not with us yet, but maybe she'll be arriving shortly.
No formal apologies.
No formal apologies yet. Any declarations of interest, anyone, please? No. Okay, thank you. Item 4 is the minutes of the previous meeting. Does anyone have any comments or corrections on the minutes? Joe?
Yeah, item 9, sorry, paragraph 9V, sorry, 9U is the bit in the Lower Ashley Road application where there was some question about whether there was a land contamination report, and it says in the minutes that there were documents publicly available on the on council's website. I think that as far as I'm aware, these documents have not been found by anyone. I'm not aware they are there. I think we need some clarity as to whether they exist at all and where we can find them. As we've previously discussed, we don't know what's going to happen with regards to an application. There doesn't seem to be any reason to think that an application won't either return to committee or there'll be something.
So Gary, can you maybe provide any insight on that?
I think so, Chair. I think there has been some confusion as to the land contamination documents. I think with that application that you were looking at last time around, nothing had been submitted with the application. So I think the comments that the contaminated land officer had provided were based upon assessments that had been carried out at the previous application. So I think that reference to documents available on the website more to do with historic documents. So apologies if it was misleading and any members felt it was documents that came in with that last application. As I'll detail shortly, the application's now been withdrawn. So, but I think given the discussion that was had, including land contamination, certainly we will ensure that updated documents on that subject come forward with any future application.
Thanks. So with this item on the minutes, can we get it amended so it refers to land contamination documents available for the previous applications rather than for this one?
We can do that, Chair. Yeah.
Thank you. Does anyone have any other comments on the minutes?
Sorry, I just wanted to come back, please. because I'm not entirely satisfied with that answer. I appreciate that we don't have an application in front of us, and I appreciate that there's an application extant application that's already had approval. But I didn't sit on that committee, and I am quite concerned that we do not have evidence that this report actually exists. And it's worrying me because I have a responsibility as a member of development control and as a councillor in the city, not wanting to do any harm. I would really like to find the evidence. I'd like to find that report. I'd like that report to be made available to both, because who knows what's going to come forward. And I'm aware that there's been some sort of petroleum leak in that area. So I really do feel quite strongly that we need to get that information, and that report needs to be made available, because I'm not going to be held responsible for a decision that I didn't make.
The application has been withdrawn, so there's no decision to make either way. The contaminated land report for the previous application that was decided upon, I assume, would still be available. Gary, is that correct?
It should be, yes, and certainly what I can take away is Councillor Sargent's query, and I can come back to all members of the committee on that matter as soon as possible.
Clive?
Thank you. Just following up, really. If I put an FOI in, would I get that contaminated report, Gary, or will you make it available to all members of committee?
So, yeah, in response, because if it was a document that came in with a planning application, an FOI wouldn't be required, but we can certainly, if it exists, we can certainly make that available. So, like I say, I'll go back and establish what exactly it was, and I'll come back to all members of the committee with an update.
Okay, if you send it to Joe, then Joe can circulate it to the rest of us, or whatever you think's appropriate.
I'll send it to all members of the committee.
Thank you.
Okay, so with that item then, that part on the minutes, if we therefore change it so it's so to state that the status of the contaminated land report is going to be confirmed and distributed to members.
Yep, Chair.
Thanks. Any other comments on the minutes? Can I have a seconder therefore to sign off the minutes? Anyone? Clive, thank you. Anyone in opposition to signing them off as read? Doesn't look like it. Okay, thank you. Next item on the agenda, therefore, is appeals. I'll hand over to you, Gary.
Thank you, Chair. Just one or two brief observations on this, and as before, really, on the theme of advertising. So you'll note item 43, which is halfway up page 19, refers to an appeal made relating to a plot of land fronting Bath Road in Totterdown. Members may well recall that you considered this application a couple of times, most latterly on your meeting on the 18th of March, where at that meeting you followed the officer recommendation in issuing a split decision. So one of the signs was approved and the other one was refused. And so this is notification that we've now received the appeal against the refusal. Also on the subject of advertising, just an observation, at the bottom of that page, item 46, there's an appeal noted there for 2 illuminated fascia signs on Newfoundland Circus. Just doing a bit of background reading, I found out that that has now been allowed by the planning inspectorate, regrettably. That was last week, so that will appear formally in your papers next time around. So just to advise you that that decision has come in, and it was against the council's delegated decision to refuse those signs. This is on the new hotel at the bottom of the M32 that's under construction at the moment. And then finally, again, also on the subject of advertising, highlighted this to DCA a couple of weeks ago. There's 2 items there, items 61 and 62 on your page 22, and they relate to 2 internally illuminated adverts at the entrance to the Cabot Circus car park. The one that's been allowed is basically the retention of the existing display. We'd sought to try and remove that, but the inspector felt that it was acceptable both in visual amenity and highway safety terms. But at the same time, the promoters of that advertising had also sought to replace it with a more of a larger backlit display. And as you can see there, we're pleased to note that that appeal was in fact dismissed. So it's kind of the status quo has been retained there. So that's my update on appeals this time around, Chair.
Thank you, Gary. Does anyone have any questions on the appeals? Sultan.
Very quickly, Gary, could you remind us, was this sign or is this sign both-sided or one-sided?
Sorry, which signing
46,
question, please?
46,
46.
Newfoundland Circle that you've just been talking about.
Well, 46, the fascia signs, they're just illuminated names on the hotel building. It was the higher level one that we were opposed to. So it will say, I think it's Moxie at the top of the hotel, illuminated.
Right. Okay, I got it. Okay. Not on the road, it was in fact on the building. Yeah, okay, great.
Thanks. Any other questions? Doesn't look like it. Okay, can we move to enforcements then? Back to you, Gary.
Very briefly, Chair. So 2 notices served since the last time the committee met. Interestingly, one of them, which is item 1, is something we serve now and again, and this is a remedial notice when we have a complaint and a formally lodged submission relating to a high hedgerow. So this is one where we've served a notice requiring specific remedial works in order to improve the amenity of the neighbour. There is as with every enforcement notice we serve, there is a right of appeal, but that has been the notice itself has been issued at the end of June. So 2 notices to report this time, Chair.
Thank you. Any questions on them? Nope. Okay. Let's move on then. The next item is the public forum. So in DC committees, we do the public forum before each application. So if you're expecting to speak about the Westbury Hill item, then don't be surprised if you're not called straight away. As I mentioned earlier, watch out for that lag between YouTube and the kind of live Zoom meeting. And when you're added, we'll just check that everything's working before setting you off on your speech. You'll have a minute to speak. We've had your statements beforehand, so there's no need to repeat that. It's just a case of going through the pertinent aspects and kind of adding any other additional points. Clive, you've got your hand up. Is that for this, on public forum?
It's actually for what was on the agenda.
Yeah, we'll come to that in a second. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So item 8 on the agenda is the planning and development. So the applications to decide on. So the first application on the list is 31 to 45 Lower Ashley Road. Members will remember that we discussed this at the previous meeting and were minded to refuse it and deferred it to allow officers to come back with suggested reasons for refusal. In the meantime, the applicant has withdrawn the application. Therefore, there's nothing for us to decide on today, and the application has been pulled from the agenda. Gary, would you like to add anything else from your point of view on that?
Yeah, only to just confirm that because it's been withdrawn by the applicant, the application no longer exists. Obviously, the debate and the resolution made by committee last time around is a matter of public record. And so because the application has been withdrawn, there is no current right of appeal from the applicant. So it's the matter's been dealt with in terms of that application, and we'll await any kind of follow-up application, which obviously would come to committee as well.
Thank you. Clive, does that cover what you were anticipating? Yeah, thank you. Okay, so the first planning application that we still got to decide upon is 27 to 31 North Street. And so we'll move to the public forum first and foremost. And first on the list is Charles Bacon.
Okay, he's just joining the meeting now. Okay, Charles, you're now in the meeting. Can I ask you to please unmute yourself? Okay, and test that your mic works for me, please.
Oh, hello, can you hear me?
Hi, yes, we can hear you.
Hi, Charles. Start when you're ready. You've got a minute. Thanks.
Hello. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to present today. My considered opinion about this application. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. Okay. Hello. Hi. Hi. Thanks. Sorry about this. Yeah, my considered opinion about this application is in accord with the case officer's recommendation for refusal. It's an ill-judged proposal of a scale and design that is highly contrasting with the local architecture. It's not well thought through in terms of well-being of those who live there. And there's several objections in terms of design, overlooking, amenity and function. But I'd just like to highlight one of the significant impacts to the immediate neighbours, which is predominantly Picture House Court, is the overshadowing, of which there just isn't an adequate study included in this proposal. And this block would no doubt cast shadows over our windows and solar panels and really diminish the energy efficiency properties which our eco homes depend. And for that reason alone, I would hope that the committee agree that such detrimental impacts should not be permitted. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Jill Shepherd, who I can see is joining.
Okay. Hi, Clive and Jill. Can I just test your mic works, please?
Hello, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you.
Hi, go ahead when you're ready. Thanks.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. So the thing that I'm really concerned about, I own one of the flats at Picture House Court, and the things that I'm really concerned about are the fact that the communal areas are so small, the private areas are so small that people will be using the communal areas most of the day and the evening, and the residents are likely to all be fairly young, which I've got no problem with, but they are likely to be noisy, I suspect. So I think there will be noise and antisocial behaviour at all times of the day and the evening, and that will stop Picture House Court residents from being able to enjoy their properties, I think. So that's really what I'm most concerned about. The air source heat pump is also likely to cause a 24-hour noise nuisance. And as pointed out by the crime reduction team, I think...
Ask you to sum up, please.
Yeah, I think there will be problems with noise, disturbance and security.
Thank you. Next, we have Evelyn Ferraris.
Okay. It's just connecting to the meeting now. Okay, Evelyn, can I ask you to unmute yourself on screen, please, and check that your mic works?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right.
So go ahead whenever you're ready.
Okay, Evelyn, can I ask you to unmute yourself on screen, please, and check that your mic works? Evelyn, can you please turn off your live stream?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I've turned off the live stream now, so it should work.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I support the recommendation for refusal on the basis that the proposal comprises the demolition of the buildings of merit on 27 to 31 North Street in their entirety, and that the proposed replacement's height, scale, and massing is not appropriate within the immediate context. The application seeks to justify the scale of the building proposed by referencing nearby buildings on higher land as a comparison. And the Clyde Place terraced houses are located behind the proposed development, but are actually situated at the top of a steep drive. Therefore, the use of their height as a reference point is irrelevant given the topography of the area, as was also noted by the City Council archaeological officer. Finally, the developers plan to install rooftop solar panels at a suboptimal 3-degree angle seems disingenuous and is not in line with the energy statements submitted with the application. So we can reasonably assume that the tilt of the panels will actually be raised post-build, which would further increase the overshadowing on the solar thermal panels on the adjacent Picture House Court building, and also increase the height.
Ask you to sum up, please.
Yeah, and visual impact of the proposed development. So I support the objections and believe the proposal should be refused.
Thank you
for your attention.
Thanks. So next we have Jonathan Flower, who I see is already with us. Can we just test your mic, Jonathan?
Yeah, good afternoon.
Hi, we can hear you all right, so go ahead when you're ready.
Great, thank you. I welcome the planning officer's assertion that 31 North Street is not a true corner plot, and like him would like to reject the developer's attempt to use this to justify a 5-storey building. However, it's equally important to note that corner plot design prejudices the ability for the adjacent sites to be developed in the future. I own a share of the freehold of that plot and asked the committee this afternoon, why should we be denied the right to develop this land in contravention of Bristol City Council's policy DM27, which is clear the proposal should not prejudice the development potential of adjoining sites. Corner plot design would put some 20 windows, balconies and doors on the side of the planned development, prejudicing our ability to be able to build. There is scope for 3 or 4 flats, coach house style, between the proposed development and our neighbour, the lawnmower shop at number 37. I trust that the committee members agree that such a corner plot design should not be permitted. Thank you.
Thank you. So next we have Tushna Commissariat. Hiya, can you just check your mic works?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. So go ahead when you're ready.
Excellent, thank you. Good afternoon. I was pleased to note the planning officer's recommendation for refusal on the basis of the high overall density of occupation for the proposed development. The units offer an average size of about 25 square meters of private space, while the council's recommendation for any 1-bed space is about 30 to 35 square meters. And the 50 square meters of communal space includes kitchen, living, dining area that is shared by residents of all 20 flats. So any resident who finds this space uninviting will only have a substandard private space. Also, the planning officer noted in their comments that the units are roughly 50% smaller than national standards and that the shared community space is not of sufficient quality or quantity to compensate. And also in the current pandemic climate, the multiple occupancy housing and shared facilities, I feel, are irresponsible and a dangerous idea as, social distancing becomes impossible. And so I trust that the committee members agree that such a high density and overcrowded building should not be permitted. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next we have Lawrence Goldberg.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me, everyone?
Yes, we can. Go ahead whenever you're ready. Thanks.
Good afternoon. So myself and my wife are the owners of the land in 27 and 31 North Street, and we are the applicants for this development. As a family, we've been in Lower North Street since the 1890s, and we've been working and living on this site since 1936. My father was born on the site and worked as a shoe repairer until his retirement, and then we have been active in the local community since. My wife is a local school teacher. We helped to develop the nature centre at Holy Cross Primary School, and we also helped with donating our building for the Santa's Grotto for the local community last Christmas. What we'd like to do is to bring the current site into a modern commercial building. The offices will be used for 7 new employees, and above that there will be a co-living residence. The co-living residence is a direct response from my family who wish to remain with the site and in the area for the long term to the climate emergency, to the housing crisis, and to do our bit in terms of improving the well-being of younger people. Loneliness is a massive issue for young people.
Ask you to sum up, please.
What I would implore the committee to do is to respect our young people and to give them an opportunity for housing within this city.
Thank you. Next we have Mel Clinton.
Good afternoon, can you hear me?
Hi, yes we can. Go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you very much. You have my written statement, so I'll just make some brief points. Reuse of the existing building is not considered viable. It is agreed that redevelopment would result in less than substantial harm to heritage assets. The benefits of the proposal are very considerable and outweigh the loss of the vacant buildings. They include 20 living spaces with shared facilities, business premises and jobs, sustainable living, zero carbon operation, electric vehicle charge point and car club facility, investment and footfall. It's been agreed that the only outstanding issue is a difference of opinion over building height. Other matters can be covered by condition and completion of the Section 106. Regarding massing and scale, the proposed building is 1 floor higher than the adjoining building. This is a mansard style setback. Variation in height is a characteristic of the area, sometimes dramatically so. Here, a high quality new building will help mark what is read as a corner in the street scene through modestly enhanced scale and stature. I hope therefore that the committee will agree that development proposal should proceed to enable delivery of the benefits outlined and to help regenerate North Street and meet the wider needs of the city. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next we have Ben Malifant. Can we just check your microphone's working, Ben?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead when you're ready.
Yeah, so thanks for the opportunity to speak. Like others, I welcome the recommendation to refuse this application. Throughout the application, myself and others have raised numerous concerns about sort of density and scale and massing, which all represent valid arguments against the scheme. The scheme itself is, however, not deliverable at present. The application is not deliverable within land under control of the applicant, and the proposed entranceway to the co-living units and the bin store requires access to be gained over land owned by Picture House Court. The parcel of land over which development access would be required and they claim ownership of is shown within our title deeds. And at present, the developer has not agreed to obtain access over our land. I note an advert was recently placed in the Bristol Post about this land, and we have highlighted our ownership of it to Bristol City Council. Thank you.
Thank you. I know that the land issue is going to be covered later on, so we'll come to that. So next we have Richard Clark. Richard, can you check your mic's working?
Hello, hi, can you hear me?
Hi, yes we can, go ahead.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I would say is that the scheme has acknowledged the desire to become a net zero carbon site in line with the Bristol City Council's announcement of a climate emergency. What we have done is we have included on the site all requirements to remove fossil fuels from the site. With regards to the PV units previously mentioned, this has been worked out in conjunction with Method Consulting, our M&E consultants, and also Eden Solar. We are placing on the site 24 panels rather than the 13 required under policy requirements. To promote sustainable travel, the site is located on prime bus routes and pedestrian routes. With regards to this, we've also agreed to install an electric car share system for the public, as well as a public accessible DC charger. Throughout this, we will also be ensuring that any additional energy required by the site will be secured under a power purchase agreement, which is a contractual requirement for green energy, which we'll expect to be 15 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And lastly, we have David Rhodes. David, can we just check your microphone's working?
Okay, David, can you please unmute on screen? Lovely, thanks.
Hi, David. Go ahead when you're ready.
Good afternoon, Chair and members. I'd like to say some brief words in support of the application and specifically to do with scale. The proposed building is a storey higher than the adjacent building, but we feel this is very much justified. Bedminster is made up of terraces of houses which rise and fall over a varied landscape. The skyline is punctured by larger structures. There's no one single pervading character, and that's what makes Bedminster special. This also allows a high quality new addition. So the site is an end of terrace location, and there is an access road coming alongside it. And surely good urban design principles should suggest that increasing scale is appropriate in such a location in order to mark a corner plot and bookend the terrace. The location is low-lying, so
I'll ask you to sum up, please.
yeah. So in summary, we've done the shadow and daylight analysis. We're confident there's no adverse impact. So I would thank you for your time today and ask you to look favourably on the application.
Thank you. So that concludes the public forum on this item. So let's move on to the officer report and presentation, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just share my screen with you to get the presentation up if I can. Okay. So has everyone got sight of the presentation on their screen?
Yeah, I've got it. Yeah, go ahead.
Brilliant. Thank you. Okay. Before I start with the presentation itself, as has been mentioned in the statements, there has been an issue raised in terms of land ownership of a small portion of the site. This is a part that is of land that's essentially adjoining the public highway, the pavement outside the application site, and it's transpired throughout the application. It's in the ownership of other parties. I was sent evidence, which I received yesterday, that it's owned by Picture House Court residents. There are some important factors in relation to this, and the proposal doesn't seek to build on this land or oversail this land. However, it would take its access across it. But it's important to understand that it is possible to apply for planning permission with someone else's land inside the red line, but those other owners do need to be notified. In this instance, it was unclear of the ownership of that land, and so at my request, an advertisement was placed in the Evening Post newspaper just to try and find out who does own it and take steps to make sure everyone's been notified. I've had a response from that, from Mr. Flower, which includes a list of addresses that have an interest in that land. And looking at our records, there are 4 properties known that have not received direct consultation. So if members are minded to approve the application, then we'd need to ensure that those parties that have an interest in the land and have not been formally consulted are given at least 21 days notice period before any decision is formally taken, if it's to approve. From discussing this with Gary previously, my understanding is that if members are minded to refuse, then this isn't an issue. So I hope that clarifies the issue in terms of land ownership. As I go through, I'll point out within my presentation which piece of land that is. Okay, so 27 to 31 North Street is located on the southern side of North Street towards its eastern end. The site abuts development here, formerly the Gala Bingo site that was redeveloped. The site is within the Bedminster Conservation Area, and on the site at the moment is this red painted building, which within the conservation area character appraisal is defined as grouped buildings of merit. So they are considered to have importance in the context of the conservation area. Just to give some context, so this is part of the Picture House Court development neighbouring the site, as are these buildings behind, and then got a little bit of street scene context in there as well. The last use of the application property was as a solicitor's office, which is A2 use, although the building is now vacant. And it's proposed to demolish the building and construct a 5-storey replacement building in its place. So the front elevation shown here, so that's the drive accessing Picture House Court properties beside. Side elevation there, so that's to the ramped access to Picture House Court, and then this is the rear. In terms of the accommodation proposed, on the ground floor, an office would be retained, which is proposed as either A1, A2 or B1 office use. I would suggest that because we are in a designated frontage here, either an A1 or A2 use is more appropriate than a B1 office, which could be restricted by condition if we get to that point. On the upper floor, also on the ground floor, we've got a refuse and recycling storage area, which would serve the commercial unit as well as the residential use above. And then we've got cycle storage and laundry facilities for the proposed co-living, which I'll come on to shortly. That area of land that's the subject of what I discussed at the beginning is this square here. So we've got bin store doors opening over it and access across it. There is an existing access across here to an emergency exit from the existing building on site, but it is just this small parcel of land in question. Moving on to the upper floors of the proposal, we've got 4 more stories, 3 of which are individual co-living units in their entirety, with 2 further co-living units on the top floor, and then these would be supplemented by a communal living space, kitchen, living dining area, and external terrace area as well. Throughout the application, members of the public have been consulted. As you heard from some of the public forum, key concerns relate to amenity impacts on future residents as well as neighbours, design with the scale and massing considered to be out of character, impact upon the conservation area and the highways impacts. There's a more comprehensive list in the officer report, but those are the sort of main subject areas of neighbouring rejection. So in terms of the uses proposed, there is a reduction in A2 floor space, but it's considered that the ground floor unit that's proposed remains a viable unit and would sit comfortably within the designated centre and the shopping frontage. And whilst it has been reduced in size, it's considered that it's reasonably occupiable by a variety of businesses. So that reduction is not considered problematic given the replacement unit. The co-living unit above is perhaps a little bit more unusual. Co-living is a relatively new concept in the UK. In fact, in Bristol, we've only had one other example determined, which was approved as part of a larger development on Unity Street in Old Market, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. There are 20 individual units proposed of co-living. These average, they're averaging just over 25 square meters each. So the range is between 20 and 32 square meters per unit. And then these are supplemented by the communal living space on the top floor. We're looking at 50 square meters of internal space and then an additional terrace, which if we're taking the planters out of the equation is about a further 35 square meters of outdoor terrace space. 3 of the individual units also have small external seating areas. It's relatively short-term accommodation targeted at a young adult demographic. There is, however, no current local or national planning policy relating specifically to co-living units. So we are operating in a bit of a policy vacuum here. And I've tried to sort of set out my deliberations within the report I've presented to you. Asking questions as to whether perhaps there's a critical mass of these types of units to make them user-friendly in terms of the facilities they can offer to compensate for the limited space available. In the individual units, each one on average represents approximately half of the National Space Standards guidance for a 1-bedroom, 2-person unit. So that's the sort of size we're looking at, and you know, whether this communal space adequately compensates for that. Looking at the draft London local plan, which is the only sort of draft policy that is perhaps near publication relating to co-living, they're recommending a minimum of 50 units to enable sort of various communal facilities to be provided to, you know, whether it's a gym or a bar, as well as communal living spaces. I discussed this point with the developers team, who came back expressing a view that this smaller scale, you know, is more on a friendship group scale, and actually, while there may be less scope to provide as many facilities within the development, it may be less isolating as a result. And I think that, you know, could be a valid argument actually. You know, you're more likely to make connections and relationships with the people that you're living with in a smaller type setup like this. Looking at the Unity Street example in Bristol, that's approved 107 co-living units, which was part of a larger scheme that also incorporated a couple of blocks of student accommodation. The co-living was split in 7 to 10 unit blocks, and it was sort of laid out like fairly typical purpose-built student accommodation. In terms of comparisons with this, as well as being a larger scale, the individual rooms, private rooms in the Unity Street were actually smaller, averaging about 20.5 square meters, but there were more communal space available per head than this. So the Unity Street offered about 4.1 square meters communal space per room on average, whereas this is looking at 2.5 internal and 2.5 external if we're excluding the vegetation. So internally we're 2.5 versus the approved 4.1. That's just by way of comparison for you, because that's the only comparable approved scheme that we have in Bristol at the moment. In terms of the accommodation, I think it can be argued that the individual rooms are fairly cramped, and I do question flexibility and adaptability as a result. But on the flip side, you know, we do have a lack of guidance, and if, as a local authority, Bristol is seeking to promote co-living as a new sort of accommodation choice, then the space on offer here in terms of individual units certainly is greater than has already been approved elsewhere in Bristol, albeit only on one occasion. And indeed, the units are larger than others, examples elsewhere in the country as well. That's not to say by any means I think the units are large, but as I said, in a bit of a policy vacuum. I hope that's useful in terms of comparison. Moving on to considering neighbour amenity. There are a number of rear windows which has given rise to concern from neighbouring occupiers, which yeah, this is the rear elevation. So the nearest windows are positioned approximately 7 metres to the nearest adjacent windows in Picture House Court. Those windows within the neighbouring development are secondary windows that serve a stairwell. So they are part of the residential accommodation, they are to a staircase, and they are not the only windows to that staircase, but it is a close relationship. Given that they're not habitable rooms and they're not the only windows serving that staircase, in my report I've put that on balance this can be accepted. In terms of other windows, sort of habitable rooms, we're looking at greater distances of separation, and there's approximately 18 metres to so the nearest windows of this terrace behind, which also forms part of Picture House Court. There are also terraces, as I've mentioned, and again, there's a rear terrace here, which overlooks the Picture House Court development, the terrace to the front as well, which would overlook North Street to the front. These relationships are not unusual within an urban context, and while overlooking would be afforded and could be possible from them, on balance, I feel that this is sort of to a reasonable level within an urban context. Concerns have been raised by neighbours in relation to noise from plant. An air source heat pump is proposed on the top floor, and overshadowing, and also odour from the ground floor bin store. If members are minded to approve, I feel that these issues could be adequately dealt with by condition, in terms of restricting noise levels and having extract system to the refuse and recycling store and that sort of thing. So moving on to design considerations. As I mentioned, the site is within the Bedminster conservation area, and the application property at the moment is defined as a group building of merit in the conservation area. Objections have been received from urban design officers, conservation officers, the Civic Society, the Conservation Advisory Panel, and members of the public in relation to the removal of this building. It's considered that the removal of the building represents less than substantial harm to the character and appearance of the conservation area, and any such harm does need to be fully justified under existing policy. The replacement 5-storey building proposed, I consider, along with urban design and conservation officers, to be out of context for the locality. This part of North Street is characterised predominantly by 2-storey development with occasional 3-storey development along it. There is one exception to this, which is the Picture House Court development next door to the site, which itself is 4-storey, the top floor of which is set well back and within a pitched roof. So from the street, it's appearing as a 3-storey, albeit 4. I don't consider that the existence of this existing anomaly to the prevailing character justifies an additional anomaly on this site, again, a storey higher. I mean, to give you an idea, the building that is proposed is roughly double the height of the existing building that is there. In alliance with urban design officers, it's not considered that this is a true corner plot or the right place to have a focal landmark building. while there is a drive to the side serving Picture House Court residents, this is a drive rather than an intersection of important streets. And again, it's questioned whether that 5-storey scale is appropriate. It's thought that it is not. Looking at densities, although it may be a little bit of a crude tool because this co-living is perhaps closer to a large HMO than a block of flats. But again, in the absence of policy, I've applied a density assessment in accordance with the Urban Living SPD. And based on each sort of co-living unit being one residential unit, it's coming out at 749 dwellings per hectare. Now, the Urban Living SPD defines the optimum density for an inner urban location such as this as 120 dwellings per hectare. So we're in the region of 6 times over that. I note within the comments from the planning agent representing the developer, he felt that it's not appropriate to apply these density calculations, but I suppose in response to that, if each of these units is half the size of the minimum we would expect for a 1-bedroom flat, then even halving those densities to 374.5 dwellings per hectare, which would be based on 10 space standards compliant flats, we're still in the region of 3 times above what the Urban Living SPD defines as optimum. So overall, in design terms, it's considered that the scheme doesn't pay due regard to local context, and that harm would be caused to the conservation area without adequate justification, and refusal of the scheme is recommended on this basis. Moving on to highways and servicing issues. The site is in a very sustainable location, walkable to the centre, good public transport links. It's designed as car-free, and our highways colleagues are supportive of that approach. Parking permits would be removed by highways so that future residents wouldn't be eligible for resident parking zone permits. We've got 24 cycle storage spaces proposed. The store perhaps is a little awkward, but a reduced provision or loss of ground floor commercial space in order to make that a bit more of a spacious store is not really considered realistic. And on balance, I'm fairly comfortable with the cycle storage that's proposed. There is improvement in terms of the pavement to the front of the building proposed, with pavement widening incorporated to the proposals. The pinch point at the moment is just over 1.2 metres wide, and our highways colleagues seek to have a minimum of 2 metre pavement width. That's almost achieved for the entirety of the site, so just over 1.9 metre width at its narrowest point is now proposed, which is an improvement in terms of pedestrian movements to what's there at the moment. To the front of the building, an electric vehicle charging point is also proposed. This would serve a new car club bay that's being put forward, as well as being publicly accessible with a public electric vehicle charging space also proposed to the front. Refuse and recycling storage on the ground floor, that's considered to be appropriately sized, and a drop curb access is also proposed to the front to aid servicing. So subject to conditions, feel that the highways aspects are appropriate for this scheme. There was a fairly late consultation response from our sustainability officers, and a number of concerns were raised within it. Firstly, concern of the shading of the neighbouring solar collectors on Picture House Court roof. The top floor of the application site has been amended during the course of the application, but I've not had a revised shadow study of the neighbouring roof as part of that, and our sustainability officer is concerned of the impact upon the sustainability credentials of the neighbouring development as a result. To the top of the development proposed, there is a solar PV array, which is angled at 3 degrees, which again, our sustainability officer has raised concern of, because at that angle, they're not self-cleaning. And there's a bit of a maintenance issue, regular maintenance needed, or they won't be affected. So he has asked that these are increased to a minimum of 20 degrees, preferably 30, for sort of optimum energy generation. And there are knock-on effects of that as to additional height increase to the roof. There are other specifications for mechanical ventilation and heating, which are not detailed in the application, and specification for air source heat pump. And we also don't have detail in relation to sustainable drainage. So this has led to a reason for refusal being added at the end of the report. Again, it's based on a lack of information. So if members were minded to approve, so technically we could condition a lot of these things, but some of them would certainly have to be pre-commencement conditions, which we do try and avoid where possible. Moving on to planning obligations, you'll see from your papers there is also a refusal reason relating to planning obligations. That's not to say that the heads of terms put forward are not appropriate, but where we are refusing a scheme, if indeed members are minded to do so, we do need to include that, just so that we don't lose the ability at appeal stage to have a legal agreement tied to it if an inspector subsequently approves a scheme. So just by way of a brief conclusion, I do have some occupier amenity concerns in relation to the size of the unit, but on the flip side, it is demonstrably better in some respects than other examples of co-living. So I've not put a refusal reason forward on the basis of co-living, on the assumption that there is an aspiration in Bristol for a diversification of sort of accommodation types available. Members may or may not agree with this approach, and I've tried to set it out evenly within my report to you. But what I have recommended refusal on is impact upon the conservation area through removal of the existing buildings of merit without a development that is considered to justify that conservation area harm, and also concerns of the development being overscaled for the location as part of that. A lack of information in relation to sustainability and also the planning obligations. So my recommendation is to refuse for the reasons set out in the papers to you. And that's the presentation for now. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to move on to questions. Joe got there first. Go ahead, Joe. And I've got Fee afterwards.
I apologise if I'm asking for answers that are already in the report, but I'm having real problems accessing documents, and I've lost my glasses as well, which doesn't help. So I wanted to ask, first of all, why this has come to committee when there is or a recommendation to refuse and there's no referral for for it to come to committee if it's being recommended for refusal. And then the other question I had was, which you touched on a bit in your report, is really kind of recognising the difference between an HMO and a co-living sort of arrangement, bearing in mind what you've already said about the size of the individual spaces and the rather limited size of the co-living space.
Okay, so there's a couple of things there. The reason for bringing to committee, a few elements to that. One of the main public objections to the proposal related or does relate to the quality of the accommodation for future occupiers. And I fully appreciate those concerns. The accommodation is cramped. However, my recommendation is to not refuse on that basis, but as I've set out, that is on assumption that this new form of accommodation, certainly new to Bristol, is supported by members, which, you know, I've come to that view based on the only other example in Bristol which was approved by members, the Unity Street Old Market scheme. Again, as I've said before, there's a policy vacuum in terms of you know, what's acceptable in relation to this. And actually, I thought it was therefore quite an important point to debate amongst councillors. So that's why I brought it. And in terms of your query, the differences between this and an HMO, this is something that I've sort of been deliberating throughout the application process. And this sort of accommodation strikes me as somewhere between a student accommodation sort of purpose-built setup and an HMO. So the difference is with a co-living offer is each unit has its own room with a lockable door. You've got a little kitchenette in there as well as your own bathroom. So in theory, you don't have to share anything with anyone, but also in theory, that's sort of too small to realistically live in there. So you're therefore likely to use the larger communal facilities. An HMO is probably more traditionally like a converted house. You'd have your bedroom and then the rest of you know, your day-to-day functions happen in a shared environment. So it's sort of I think it's somewhere between student accommodation and an HMO in terms of how it actually works.
Thank you very much for that, and I appreciate what you said about feeling that it needed a discussion on the committee. I think that's a really positive and really valid reason for bringing it. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Fees next.
Hello there. You mentioned in response to the local residents' concerns about noise, you mentioned that could be conditioned. Given that the building would be built by the time the noise arose, how could it be conditioned? What sanctions could be taken against excessive noise arising from the building? I'm not too sure I understand. Thanks.
So there are different elements. So there's noise from plant and equipment, which is something that we regularly condition against using sort of background noise levels as a reference, and it's standard practice for you know, air source heat pumps and other mechanical ventilation, that sort of thing, to be rated so that it's at least 5 decibels quieter than background noise levels. So that's a fairly standard sort of pollution control condition we apply to a lot of development. In terms of the occupiers and the noise that they may create, it's perhaps a little bit more difficult to pin down. Our pollution control officer recommended, if it is to be approved, a management plan to be conditioned, which could include things such as hours of usage of the communal terrace area, for example. Unfortunately, if it goes beyond that and it does become a nuisance, it would be you know, environmental health legislation to control excessive noise at antisocial times, which would be the case with anywhere across the city that's making unacceptable amounts of noise at inappropriate times.
Is that okay, Fee? Yep, thank you. Clive next then.
Thank you. I've got a question that came in the public forum about prejudicing another property's ability to develop. And then I'd like to start exploring this idea of cohabitation, because if we got to make policy in public, this is possibly the best place to do it, and at least it's democratic. So first of all, one of the correspondents said that it was going to prejudice their ability to develop their land. Firstly, is that true? And secondly, if that's against policy, shouldn't that be a reason for rejection?
So there is part of one of our design policies that makes reference to development not prejudicing neighbouring development plots. And the area of land in question, if you remember from the slides I showed, is the access drive beside the property leading up to Picture House Court. So neighbouring residents have put forward an argument that they may wish to develop over that land, retaining a vehicle access beneath the building that has some sort of accommodation above.
So it's actually that same little square we're talking about?
No, it's not. It's on the other side. There's a tarmac drive. Hang on, if I can.
Yeah, I'd be interested, because obviously that square has got rights of way over it, so you can't develop that. So if we're talking about a different bit, I'd like to know, please.
We are. Hang on, if I can share my screen again, then that'll probably be the easiest way to show you. There we go. So, bear with me. So it's actually this area here,
right,
that's being referred to. Now, there's a couple of elements. So the replacement building that's proposed on the site has several side-facing windows that look onto that drive. So obviously, if that neighbouring plot was to be considered a development plot, then the existence of all these windows and balconies would prejudice the development of
okay, we've had this come up in previous planning meetings I've been on, where ideally the property is set back a bit from the next person's land, or else there must be no windows because of that. So is that a reason for, it strikes me it is an issue, real issue. Is it therefore potentially a reason for rejection?
Could I come in on that one, Chair? I mean, normally that policy is applied to...
From an initial look, I don't...
Oh, sorry. I'll just come in on that, if that's okay. Yeah, so that policy is normally applied to undeveloped plots or sites that are ripe for redevelopment. The piece of land that you're looking at there, it's an access to a recently completed development. So if it was developable, I would have thought it would have come forward as part of that development, which is carried out by this or the people associated with this application, by the way. And then if you look at the photographs, we recall, you don't need to reshare your screen, Andy, but there's quite a significant change in levels in terms of that access. So we're not talking about a flat access where you could perhaps build a coach house type development above it and maintain access through the site. I don't know how you would actually build over that access, because all of a sudden, you know, the access would be prevented by the diminishing gap between the access and the underneath of the building. So it is an issue, but I don't think it's personally, I'd advise you it's not an issue you should give any real weight to in this case because of those situations.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, so questions, and I appreciate I'm trying to make sure I don't do debate while I'm in the questioning bit. There's all that office space on the ground floor. Now, comparing that with Unity Street, where the office space looked like some of it was available for the cohabitation residents, is any of this office space available for those 20 people or so?
It's a separate unit.
Right, okay.
It's a mixed-use development, a business use on ground floor and residential above, essentially.
So therefore, the only shared space they have is up on that top floor, which is, what was it, 50 square meters, wasn't it? So it could be roughly 10 by 5, like that. So I've looked at what 10 by 5 might be, and stick 20 people in that, and that's pretty cramped. If we reject this on your 3 reasons, and then the applicant comes back having satisfied those 3 reasons, can we then object on cramped planning, on cramped living conditions? Or if we have an issue with that, is that something we need to add as a reason today?
Can I answer that one, Chair? Because it comes up now and again, of course. Really, if committee are minded to refuse this application, you should do so on all of the reasons that you feel are relevant and defendable, because what Councillor Stevens has said is correct. If the applicant starts to deal with the three reasons one by one, it would be frowned upon by a planning inspector, I think, if we then went on to refuse it for an additional reason later on, if the scheme hadn't changed in a way that raised that issue for the first time. So I think it's an issue to be considered now. And I think in the report, whilst the recommendation isn't to refuse in terms of inadequate living accommodation for the occupiers, I think the report says something along the lines, it opens the door to that being a valid reason should members wish to use it.
Okay, so without giving anything away, there's some distinct differences between this and Unity Street. And I think the planning officer talked about 50 units or more being critical, but then he said has sympathy with an argument about 20 would be more, I can't remember the exact word, but let's say cozy. I think if we're going to have a proper debate on this, you might want to, Chair, you might want to structure this more
you have
openly.
Another question, Clive?
Yeah, you might. Yeah,
we're not on the discussion yet.
Well, I was actually going to say you're going to have questions and discussion together, because it doesn't fit into the normal way of making the planning decision, because there's no policy, and I'm not going to. I'm really annoyed that there's no policy on this. It's not in the urban living SPD. We've had ages
can I
since
ask if you've got a question? Because
my question is why don't we have a policy?
Okay, I can come in on that. Members will be aware of the delays to the local plan, which are linked to the sub-regional situation, the JSP. And without that progress on that, we can't really progress the local plan meaningfully. We are looking at guidance, as you know, on a number of key topic areas. Our co-living is a very recent initiative. Obviously, this is the second scheme now, and I think we're kind of looking at kind of how we should deal with these on a case-by-case basis. And I think, you know, so I can't promise you a policy guidance note on this issue. It's something we're doing more kind of research into. Until then, you know, unfortunately, it is a case of determining each case on its merits. We do have a number of policies that do apply, but obviously nothing that specifically does to co-living.
Okay, Chair, I finished my questions, but I will feed back on Gary's answer in the commentary.
Okay. Sultan, I saw your hand up a second ago. Do you want a question? Have you got a question? You're on mute.
Okay, so very quickly, I just wanted if Andy could remind us, the space standard on Unity Street, was it as less as 50% smaller? And also, what happened if the owner of the adjacent land is found, and if he rejects to accommodate the request, and how noisy are the heat pumps?
Okay, I think three elements to that. So first of all, in terms of comparison to Unity Street, so this current proposal, on average, each private room is approximately 25 square meters, and that is supplemented by 2.5 square meters per room on average of communal space. The Unity Street scheme had smaller individual rooms at approximately 20 square meters each, but they had slightly more communal space on average at 4.1 square meters. So overall, this scheme provides more space per person than the Unity Street, based on single occupancy per room, but less of that is communal space and more of that is individual space.
Okay.
Secondly, you asked about the access, the land ownership issue. That, as I alluded to before, you can apply for planning permission on someone else's land. So you could apply to build something in, my back garden if you wanted. Wouldn't necessarily be able to build it. You can do that as long as you notify the landowner. Where you don't know who the landowner is, you have to take all reasonable steps to try and ascertain who it is and put notification in the press. There's been a bit of an issue here that we found out some of the landowners and not all have been notified. As long as those owners are notified, then given a 21-day period, the planning decision can be taken as an approval if members wish. That doesn't necessarily mean you have rights of access or even agreement to build on land. There's no building on the land proposed here. It's purely within the red line and be an access corridor. The issue is all people with an interest in the land need to be notified. It's a totally separate thing to the actual decision itself, and any sort of access negotiations that may need to happen would be a private matter between parties. Hopefully that makes sense. I don't know if Gary wishes to add anything to that, or if you think I've covered it adequately.
No, I think you've covered that, Andy. Really, it's not in itself. It's not a planning issue.
Okay. And the last one was heat pump.
Air source heat pumps. It depends on the specification of the pump. We don't have that specification. Different installations have different noise levels. As I previously mentioned, if this development were to be approved, there certainly would be a condition restricting maximum noise levels to at least a maximum of 5 decibels below existing background noise. So there would be a noise survey needed to be taken and a specification of the installation for heat pump proposed that would be pinned down by condition.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any more questions, please? Doesn't look like it. So let's move to the discussion then. Who wants to start off? Mike, you got there first.
Okay, well, I think that co-living could and should be part of the housing ecosystem of Bristol, and I don't see why it should just be of a very large scale. I mean, it might not seem very appealing to all of us, but for some people, not permanently, but for a period of time, it might be quite suitable. And like with anything, people choose where they want to live. Nobody's forcing them. I don't think it's particularly objectionable in massing or design as a building. And I can see that there are buildings taller than 2 stories in the vicinity. I realize there are some things that would need to be ironed out with conditions, but I think on balance, I can support this.
Thanks, Mike. Ollie's next.
Thank you, Chair. Just to disagree totally with Mike there a bit, I have to say that whilst I can understand, certainly in the past, the co-living side of things, I think at the minute with what we've seen happening with the COVID outbreak and people's need to isolate, that's something that going ahead from now, and not necessarily on this particular one, because I don't think it's fair on the developer to throw it at them at this stage, because I think they've done a reasonable job of trying to come up with a sensible proposal for the site. But I think that going ahead, we need to be a bit wary of the fact that we're now being advised that there might be future lockdowns. So anything that meant that people had to try and isolate, but they might have to isolate with about 5 or 6 or 10 other people that they don't necessarily know and who might or might not adhere to lockdown rules. I think that would be something for the planners at least to bear in mind in the future. But on this particular application, the only question I actually had was one that was answered by the officer during the presentation about the lack of information about the drainage strategy. And that was something that had been flagged up by the flood risk officer. And I think that the advice from people like the Conservation Advisory Panel and the Archaeological Officer about the fact that it would be a loss of buildings that are seen as, what was the term they said, that would adversely affect the conservation area, and demolition is contrary to relevant heritage policies, for example. So I think personally I'm siding with the officers here, and I think that it would be good to not approve this application at this stage.
Thanks, Ollie. Fee is next.
Thank you very much, Tom. Yeah, there's a lot to like about this application, to be honest. I've got no particular effect to the mode of accommodation it offers. I think that's, we've got to move with the times and all that. I like the fact they've taken the trouble to put an electric charging point out the front, and there's bits and pieces, and they've got cycle racks, hooray. Slightly iffy solar power, yes, a bit tokenistic that. But I can't approve this just on the basis of the visual amenity. I just think it's it's really out of keeping in the area and will make it ugly. So I'm sorry, can't support it.
Thanks, Fee. Clive, you're up next.
Thank you, Chair. I'm trying to think back to my 20s and even early 30s. I think I'd like to live in a place like this, need more space. It sounds potentially fun. And I think I agree with Mike's analysis. It becomes a new housing form. I think it could work or not on a large scale. I'm really annoyed, as you probably picked up, that we're being asked to set policy without any help whatsoever. And I think that's appalling. And I want to put that on the public record. Well, it is, isn't it now? So pass that on, please, Gary. We've just recently increased our space standards in the UK. They are still the smallest in Europe, even now. And yet you've got this, which is coming in, which doesn't even meet that. So for me, this is definitely too cramped. And it might be that the individual room sizes are not so bad, especially compared with Unity Street. But the amount of co-lived-in space, 50 square meters, is far too small, even for 20 people. I know there's a bit of outside. So I think if we're beginning to set policy, we need to try and find out what we would agree with as a minimum individual room size. And then also some form of formula that has a minimum for the co-lived-in space. But when you get up to 700 odd dwellings per hectare, you are asking for trouble. And COVID is a pure example of making us think more carefully about people's ability to live in their own private area. It's a little bit different to an HMO in that people have got flats as opposed to bedrooms, but I think that's something we need to consider. And the ND6, ND7 developments from Legal and General are cohabitation, but less communal facilities, although it has a gym, and bigger flats. So we need to bring all these into our consideration. I think without just relying on memory and having looked at Unity Street, unfortunately, because this is 20 people, that in itself isn't a reason to say no. But I think it's 20 people and not enough communal space. You can't stick 20 people in that 10 by 5 room. It'd be more like a party. So for that reason, and for the reason of the damage to the building, well, in fact, it's demolition, isn't it? And the impact on the conservation area, I'm going to vote against. I'm going to vote with the officer, but adding that the extra reason of cramped conditions. Thank you.
Thanks, Clive. Sultan, I saw your hand up on the screen a bit ago. Do you want to speak?
Right. Thank you, Chair.
Go ahead.
Right. So this is kind of presented with quite a lot of issues, of course, but with I very politely disagree with some of these comments made about COVID and how it's impacting. You know, I rather have a roof over my head, or I would like to see over somebody's head than anything else. It could be a cramped place, but if a person is under a roof and not on the street, then I prefer this. And if people are irresponsible of their health and hygiene, and they challenge themselves that they're brave and all this and nothing will affect them, and then they don't follow the guidelines of how you should maintain yourself in an emergency, then so be it. That's it. That is their choice if they want to present themselves to death, you know. But I would rather, I don't wish that on anybody, but I would rather have some sort of roof over somebody than nothing. I know there are issues, real issues, in terms of whether it is in keeping with the area, whether there is a good intention in terms of solar panel, whether it is the height. There are issues, but I think the overall Bedminster and certain area of our city are not really very much in keeping. Every buildings are in keeping. There are various buildings in various sizes and height and all this. So I don't think so. That is a big issue here as well. The others, you know, I mean, when you talk about the density and talk about the you know, spaces and all this, I think if we were to provide more and more accommodation for single people, you know, with single parents, with single couple, then we do need to have further this kind of small development. And also in keeping that in mind, we are in an extremely difficult time going forward. A lot of people won't be able to afford even their rent in coming weeks and months and years. So small places would rather give someone a shelter, and I would prefer that than anything else. And also, I think Fee rightly said, they tried to accommodate best they could, maybe. Even they take the sort of initiative to put a EV charger point and so on. So personally, in balance, I think I would go along with Mike, and I would support this this application.
Thanks, Sultan. Joe, I think your hand was up and went down. Do you want to?
No, I did put it up. I don't know why it's gone down again.
Anyway, go on.
Well, it's quite interesting to see how differing people's opinions are, but I'm tending to go on the side of, well, I agree with a lot of what Clive said. I think we're sort of entering into new terrain here with having a sort of discussion about something that doesn't exist in much in Bristol, and I think we have to be really careful. I think what we're talking about here is not a hostel, which, to be honest with you, is what it sounded like Sultan was talking about. What really worries me about this, I agree, it's got some good things going for it, but it's not a very big space for 20 people. I would call that overcrowding. And the biggest worry that we have about that sort of accommodation is the impact it has on people's mental health and well-being. And I think the officer even mentioned it with the fact that 8 of the rooms are single aspect, and it can end up feeling very, it can feel oppressive. And I worry because, as Clive's already said, and I think Fee commented as well, the communal space is very limited. And it's quite difficult to be in that type of environment if you have, if you're already feeling uncomfortable. And I think that I do not feel that this meets the standard that I would like for us to have if we're going to go down the route of co-living. I think co-housing, co-living can be a very positive thing, but it's got to be done with care. And I just think this is it's just too crowded. So I can't support it. So I will be supporting the officer's recommendation.
Thanks, Joe. I'd like to move to having a motion now. Does anyone want to propose one? Clive, you've got your hand up. Is that for?
Thank you, Chair. Now, the first proposal is presumably going to be for the officer's recommendation, and I might do that at the end of this. I've actually got a question. What would be the situation if one of the inhabitants then was going to have a child? Would they be able to bring children up in this property, or would they have to exit? And is that something we can condition? So sorry, Tom, but
I think I'll attempt to answer. I don't think we could condition that at all. There's it's of a scale. There could be a management plan that's talking about how to manage the shared amenity space in terms of amenity for neighbours and the like. But in terms of going that step further and controlling who occupies it and on what terms, I think as it sort of steps outside of planning control.
That actually helps me with my decision, because I think we need to, if you're setting policy, you need to realise that it wouldn't be impossible to have young children in this property, and consequently it makes it even, for me, I can't go with this. So therefore I'm happy to, let me have a think, because it would be the officer's recommendation, but I would want to add a 4th reason, which would be the cramped conditions. So is that mean that someone proposes it and then someone proposes an amendment? How does it work, Gary?
So we can propose the motion with the amendment straight on.
Okay.
For the sake of saving time, if you want.
So I'm proposing that we go with the officer's recommendation to refuse, which includes the 3 reasons down there, plus that and I'm not sure what the right planning words would be, but the accommodation is too cramped. It's too dense. It would be unhealthy, mental health, and other aspects.
If the officers might want to come in and suggest any appropriate wording for that kind of.
So it's in relation to concerns of the residential amenity of future occupiers. So we're looking at, I don't want to put words into your mouth, but
no, please do.
Well, the concerns that the quality of the accommodation doesn't provide for an adequate living environment for future occupiers in terms of the amount of space available, flexibility and adaptability. And certainly there are elements in our policies that are available if you want to refuse on those grounds.
I didn't get to write that down, but this has been recorded. So whoever writes this up can get the exact wording. But it was about the quality of accommodation not being meeting what Andy said. So on that basis, I propose going with the officer's recommendation plus a 4th reason for rejection down to the quality of accommodation not being up to it.
Okay, thanks, Clive. Does anyone want to second that, please?
I'll second it.
Go on, Joe. Fee, I think maybe got there as well, but I'll let you have it, Joe. Okay, so that's the motion before us, which is to refuse as per the officer recommendation with an additional condition regarding residential amenity and quality of living for future occupants. So I'll go through everyone for the votes. You first, Clive.
So I vote for this, which is supporting the motion.
For, thank you. Fee?
I'm voting for this motion, yeah.
For, thank you. Yep. Joe?
For.
For, thank you. Leslie?
For.
For, thank you. Mike?
Against.
Against, thank you. Ollie?
For.
For, thank you. Sultan? You're on mute, Sultan.
Against.
Against, thank you. And I'll vote for the motion as well. So that's 6-2. The motion is carried to refuse the application. So let's have a break, comfort break, before the next item. I'll say 5 minutes, but round it up. So if we come back at 15:45, and please make sure you are at your desk with the video on by 15:45. Thank you. And remember, the webcast will stay live.
Gary. Hi, Gary.
Hello, the meeting's still live, by the way.
Okay, can you see me?
Yes, I can.
Meeting hasn't resumed yet?
No, but I think it's still being broadcast on YouTube.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
So we're still waiting for Mike, Joe, and Fee by the looks of it.
I'm here, sorry. Here we are.
Fee's here, so Joe and Mike.
You too.
There's Joe. And here's Mike. Excellent. Thanks for being back on time, everyone. So let's get straight into the next item, which is 51 to 53 Westbury Hill. And give me a second to find the public forum, because my iPad is dying. Public forum for this item, we have, first of all, Mark Sennett. Is Mark, I don't see him in the waiting room.
No, he's not in the waiting room, sorry.
Okay, well, not with us, so we'll have to skip Mark and go to Councillor Steve Smith.
Okay. Admitting Councillor Smith now. Okay, he's in the meeting. Can I just test that your mic works, please, Steve?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yep. Go ahead, Steve.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm speaking on behalf of the three councillors for Westbury and Henleys this afternoon, and we're all agreed in asking you not to approve this application. On parking, it sits on the corner of Cambridge Crescent, which is the biggest hotspot in Westbury-on-Trim for parking problems. It's the source of lots and lots of correspondence in our council inboxes for people asking for help with parking problems. It's a source of constant daily stress to residents who cannot get anywhere near their houses. There are no driveways. They're competing for curb space with shoppers and commuters. And to add another 10 bed spaces or six bedrooms worth of accommodation with no additional parking can only make that bad situation worse. It's a loss of amenity for existing residents and causes problems for new ones. We're also concerned that the proposed flats have no outdoor amenity space at all, to the extent that the bin store is in the building, which can't be pleasant. It overlooks private homes in all directions and gardens, which currently enjoy privacy. And the massing of it on the corner of what's actually quite a narrow road on Cambridge Crescent, currently it's quite open because the top stories are set back. If you bring that up right to the edge of the road, it turns that nice wide opening to the road into more of a canyon. So for all of those reasons, I think my minute's up, but we ask you please not to approve this today. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Okay, so let's go to the officer presentation then, please.
Thanks, Chair. I'll just share my screen. Can you all see that?
Yep.
Okay, great. So yes, so the application that I'm presenting today relates to 51 to 53 Westbury Hill. So the site is located within the Westbury-on-Trim within the north of Bristol. And it's currently occupied by a part single-storey building at 51 Westbury Hill and a part three-storey building at 53 Westbury Hill. The ground floor of both of the properties is currently operating as a shop in use class A1, and the first and second floors of 53 Westbury Hill are currently operating as an office in use class B1. However, in 2019, 53 Westbury Hill was given prior approval for the change of use of the offices to residential. In terms of where the area surrounding the site, this includes a mix of uses, including residential and commercial. The site is located in the Westbury-on-Trim primary shopping area and also on the Westbury-on-Trim town centre designation. It's also located within the conservation area and is identified as a character building within the commercial core. So in terms of the proposals, the application seeks planning permission for a proposed first and second floor extension above 51 Westbury Hill, and the change of use of the upper floors of 53 Westbury Hill to provide 2 new flats. The application would retain the shop at the ground floor level and utilise the existing entrance at 53 Westbury Hill for the proposed flats. So the application proposes 2 3-bedroom flats, both of 5 bed spaces, and they will be located over each storey. In terms of the appearance, the proposal has been designed to take its proportions and references from the adjacent 2-storey element at 53 Westbury Hill. However, it's not an exact copy and has been designed with a slightly more modern vernacular. The materials and window proportions have, however, been chosen to match the existing, but the proposed development and the extension includes 3 vertical window components, 2 on the front and 1 on the rear, which are proposed to emphasise a break between the old and the new, as well as to accentuate the corner. The proposal was also retain the existing stone coping above the shop front, and this has been added following a specific request from the City Design Group. So as mentioned in the public forum statement, the application does not propose any dedicated off-street car parking, but does include dedicated separate bin and bike stores at ground floor level. So in terms of consultation, the application has received 12 objections from local residents and 1 objection from the Westbury Trim Society. Comments received an objection have concerned harm to the conservation area, impact of scale and massing, lack of off-street parking, loss of employment uses, concerns of overlooking and overbearing, and concerns about lack of amenity space for future residents. It is worth noting that a number of objections also raised concerns about overdevelopment of the site, which was within the context of a now withdrawn application for Cambridge House to the rear. So the withdrawn application was also submitted by the applicant and proposed the demolition of the existing building at the rear and the redevelopment of the site to provide 3 terraced houses. However, this application was withdrawn following the LPA raising a number of concerns about the proposed development. As mentioned by Councillor Smith, the application has been jointly referred to committee by the 3 ward councillors, but the application has received no objections from internal or external consultees. So in terms of key issues for the site, the first one is thinking about the principle of development and primarily the loss of the employment use. It is considered that the principle of development is acceptable. The application would retain the shop at ground floor level, which is a key policy requirement for town centres and primary shopping areas. The loss of employment uses at first and second floors is also considered to be acceptable in the context of the prior approval, which sets a valid fallback position and therefore would not result in the loss of any additional employment use. And then in terms of residential use at the site, this is also considered to be acceptable as it's located in a sustainable mixed use location, and also there is a shortage of flat provision within the area, so it would positively contribute to the housing mix. Turning to design and harm to the conservation area, as mentioned, the application is located within the commercial core of the conservation area. The character appraisal for the conservation area outlines that predominant materials in this part of the commercial core include red brick and red clay double Roman Pantel tile roofs, and it also further outlines the predominant scale and massing for the area is 2 to 3 storey terraces with retail ground floor frontages and residential above, which is in keeping with the proposed development. So during the application, the proposals were discussed with the City Design Group and no objection was raised. At the pre-application stage, the City Design Group did not raise any concerns about a 2-storey extension to 51 Westbury Hill, but did ask that the applicant took its proportions and references for the proposed extension from the adjacent building at 53 Westbury Hill, and it's considered that this has been achieved. Turning next to harm to residential amenity, a number of concerns have been raised by members of the public relating to the impact of the proposed development on their amenity. This particularly relates to overlooking and overbearing. So in terms of overlooking, the nearest properties to the proposed development are 49 Westbury Hill, which is located here to the south on the other side of Cambridge Crescent, and then the properties to the rear fronting onto Cambridge Crescent, so they're located here. In terms of 49 Westbury Hill, this does contain one side window at first floor level, which is located approximately 15 metres from the application site. The proposed development on this elevation would contain 6 windows, 2 of which would directly front onto the existing window at 49 Westbury Hill. So whilst it is acknowledged that the 15-metre separation distance isn't ideal and is less than the optimal 21-metre separation distance, it is considered that on balance, this would not warrant the overall refusal of the applications. The windows would be broadly located in the same location as existing, although set forward on the extension. And a 15-metre separation distance between windows and habitable rooms is common in the area, as evidenced further along Cambridge Crescent. So that's referring to the gap between the properties along Cambridge Crescent. In terms of overlooking to the rear, the proposed development is located approximately 20 metres from the nearest residential dwellings along Cambridge Crescent, and Cambridge House, which is this property here, is located in the rear, between this and the dwellings. Therefore, the roofline of Cambridge House would help to screen direct views. In terms of overbearing, it is considered that the scale of the proposed development is acceptable and would be in keeping with its immediate context. The proposed extension has been designed to meet the former massing of 53 Westbury Hill, and the conservation area appraisal acknowledges that 2 to 3 storey buildings are predominant within the commercial core. The development would also be separated from surrounding residential development by both Cambridge Crescent and Cambridge House. In terms of amenity for future occupiers, the proposed development would meet and quite significantly exceed the nationally described space standards for both flats. It is acknowledged that neither flat would have access to outdoor, private or communal amenity space, but on balance, this is considered to be acceptable given the site's close proximity to surrounding amenity space, including a number of parks that are shown on the map. Turning to the other issues, so transport and movement and the lack of off-street parking has been raised. The application was discussed with Transport Development Management, and they confirmed that given only 2 dwellings are proposed, they would not recommend refusal of the application on the basis of lack of car parking. They did, however, raise some initial concerns about the location of the bin and bike storage, as these were originally located at first and second floor level. But following this, the applicant has relocated the bike and bin storage to ground floor level, which is now considered to be acceptable. In terms of the final key issue for the site, the sustainability statements demonstrates that through a combination of energy efficiency measures, including solar PV, the site would achieve a 22.3% carbon dioxide saving, which is in line with policy. So in terms of recommendation, the application is recommended for approval, subject to the conditions outlined within the committee report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions from members on this, please? Mike?
It's probably a question for Gary. Gary, with the new permitted development changes the government are bringing in, is this the kind of thing that could be a permitted development in the future?
That's a good question. I mean, the PD rights that are coming in now, that they've been trailed for a long time. They're extremely complicated. They're almost like planning applications, but without the ability to negotiate. certain policy aspects like space standards and affordable housing and sustainability criteria. So, not very popular with us or with you, I'm sure. What the analysis of them so far, the ones coming in imminently, is that there probably will be very limited circumstances where they would apply. It's really specific where they apply. So I'm not so sure. I'd need to plough through the very extensive regulations that have come out to actually answer that question properly. So apologies, I can't do at the moment. But can I just kind of add to that really that half the property already benefits from permitted development rights that have been in place for a number of years, and that's the prior approval that Natalie referred to, which was granted for the change of use of the existing office at first floor level to residential. And so I just wanted to use that as an opportunity just to mention there is a fallback position here of that one additional unit already. So the net increase, I believe, is 1 unit. So sorry if that answers a slightly different question, but that's the best I can do given the confusion around the PD rights that have now come in.
Thanks, Gary. Clive.
Thank you. I'm going to explore parking. So am I right in understanding that this is not a residence parking zone?
Yes, that's correct. It's not.
Right, it's not. Okay. And there, as Gary said, there is prior approval for one property already. Is that a 5-bed flat?
I'm not sure what the bed space is. That's a maisonette, so it's proposed over the 2 stories, 1 dwelling. I can double check what the I should be able to find it here. Sorry, should be in my
Okay.
report.
Well, I'll ask my next question while you're checking, if that's okay. So I was trying to get a grasp for what the net difference in cars, for example, if the permitted development was probably going to generate 2 or 3 cars, and if this is going to generate 4 to say 6, then the net difference is just 2 or 3, and that's the number that I'm interested in.
So the prior approval was for the 1st and 2nd floors from office to resi, 1 3-bedroom flat.
Right.
So, yeah.
That's 3 beds, and we're now going to 10 beds, yeah?
No, sorry, we're now going to 6 bedrooms.
Right, okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so 3 beds goes to 6 beds.
Yeah.
So the net difference is 3 beds. Do we have a rule of thumb for how many cars that might generate? 2, 3?
Possibly. I'm not aware of a specific rule of thumb that we would use, but I would say that's probably reasonable to assume.
Yeah, okay. And obviously, given the location, I know that reasonably well because it's very near the Pot at Wat, which is occasionally where I used to go and have a beer. So I think that is my questions regarding parking, and other stuff will come into the discussion. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Clive. Leslie, you've got your hand up.
Yes, the waste bins, they're now located on the ground floor, but how are they actually going to come out? Because the only exit I can see is the normal one on the front, and that looks as if it's up 2 or 3 steps.
Yes, so it is, and it's not ideal, but they have agreed to install a ramp system for those steps to aid the movement of both. Well, that is specifically to aid the movement of spikes, but we could also request that it's extended to aid the movement of bins as well, if that could be secured via condition, if that's something the councillors would like to see.
Is that going to be a permanent ramp, or is it just going to be a temporary one that they pull out when they need to?
I think it's permanent on the steps. For the bikes, it would be permanent. Obviously, for the bins, it would need to be bigger, so it may be that was temporary, that could be moved out of the way.
Right. Thank you.
Okay. Does anyone else have any questions? Joe?
Sorry, just following on from Leslie's questions about the bins. And are we aware of a sort of a system like this that works? Because it's a little bit sus to me, to be honest. Getting, especially, you know, everything being inside. If it was a block of flats, you might have like some sort of basement kind of management system that might work quite well. And if there was a bit more space on the road, maybe you could have an underground storage system. But those options don't appear to be available. So I was just wondering, is it realistic to expect that rubbish to be coming out, you know, recycling and whatever, to be coming out every week in that manner? And, you know, the issues around sort of, you know, how obstructive it might be and how it works in turn. I mean, yeah, I mean, I just would think, I think we need a little bit more information about how that might work.
Okay. Yeah, the only thing I would say is that it is only 3 steps, so it's not a significant flight of steps, but I do appreciate the point. And yeah, I mean, it could be that, well, obviously, if it were to be conditioned, then we'd be conditioning details of that, and we'd have to make sure that they were sufficient to, you know, to meet the requirements of that condition. And it wouldn't be approved or discharged unless we were satisfied with the detail provided.
Okay. Leslie's hand is still up. Do you have another question, Leslie, or is that from before? You do. Go ahead.
The ramp. I just wanted to ask you, presumably that's not going to come straight down. The pavement's not long enough, not wide enough to accommodate it. So it would have to go, turn the corner and go under the windows of the shop.
So I think, so the ramp that I'm talking about, forgive me if we're looking at a different area, is internally within the ground floor. The 3 steps are, once you're through the door, then there's a corridor, and then there are 3 steps down.
Could I suggest you share your screen,
Yeah,
just so we're all looking at the same thing? Thanks.
Sure. Apologies, I'm just trying to get it to share the right, there we go. See that here?
Yes.
So it's these ones here that I'm referring to. So that's they are internal.
Oh, right.
And these are the stores here. And here.
And the bikes are going to be out of the way. We're not going to get people dumping their bikes in the first part and throwing the whole thing, making an absolute mess of the whole thing.
Well, yeah, no, hopefully not, given that there is a dedicated store here, so they would have the facilities within the building here and not within the corridor.
Right.
Okay. Clive?
I didn't get there quick enough. I was going to say, Natalie, hold that picture.
Oh, sorry. Get it back.
The reason is I was trying to work out where the entrance was to the upstairs flats and whether that was the same entrance.
Yes, so all the entrances are the same. They come in through the same way off 53.
Right by the bikes and the bins, yeah.
Yeah.
So you take your bike in, drop it off left.
Yes, that's right. Hang on, I'll reshare this screen with you.
Okay. And those, that look like 3 or 4 steps. I mean, yeah, okay.
That's correct. These ones here. And then up.
So, and we've got the normal size wheelie bins that are going up those steps. Okay. And all right, I'm not convinced. I appreciate others pointing that out. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Does anyone else have any questions? Just checking. No, it doesn't look like it. Ollie, I can't see you. Oh, hello.
Oh, sorry, I'm here, Chair.
Yeah, no, you could just see your shirt sleeve.
I've got the papers open on my desktop, and I've got this on as well. So
no, it's
sorry,
fine. Just wanted to make sure you weren't asleep.
No, sadly, no, Chair, wide awake.
Let's move on to the discussion then. Does anyone want to start off? Sultan?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so I know the area reasonably well as well, and Cambridge Crescent and all this. So the two apartments, I don't think so it's going to add any significant impacts on public in any way. If you talk about traffic, the parking in the area are on-street parking. So the Westbury is visited by hundreds of people across from Stoke Bishop, Henleys, Southmead, all the area, and parked everywhere. And just in front of this building, there is a surgery car park as well, huge surgery car park. So the car park, I don't think so it's a big issue. With the ramp and bin, I don't think so it's a big issue. And it's just two apartments, and there's a precedence in there as well. And I think they are also meeting the obligation of energy as well. Transport didn't have any issues, and it does exceed the standard living space, national standard living space. So, and I don't think so. And overlooking, I don't think so here is a big issue either. So, looking into all this, I think I am minded to support this application.
Thank you. I have Ollie next.
Thank you, Chair. I've been quite impressed at the effort that's gone into trying to make the proposals blend in and be a sort of a pleasant enough addition to the area. And I think also, given the likelihood that the new, I mean, I've been reading about the new permitted development rights today, and that given how none of that has to be considered almost in some of the proposals, I think I'd rather approve a good option today than see a bad option being just sort of plonked there in the future. So I'm quite happy with supporting this application.
Thank you. Clive next.
Thank you. So we have some policy that helps us make a decision here, and it seems to meet the urban living policy very well. We've got, it's a very good location for housing. In fact, it's a lovely location, full stop. It's part of densification. There's a shortage of flats, so these are flats. So it meets the urban living SPD, except the outdoor amenity space. But if there's lots of parks and things to do, then that mitigates against that. So I think from a urban living SPD point of view, it ticks all the boxes. So I'm happy with that. Now the parking, the issue on the parking is the marginal difference going from one flat to two flats. So that's 2 or 3 cars. And it strikes me that Westbury-on-Trim needs to start deciding whether to get a residence parking zone in place, because I would be really concerned if parking was constraining providing houses or flats, places to live. You can't stop that. We're trying to densify areas where it makes sense. It supports sustainable transport, supports the shops. That's good. And you can't just have a reason like parking defeat that. So therefore, I urge the councillors to start thinking about whether they need a residence parking there, if they're watching. And I think the bins, it's not ideal, but it's not enough to refuse. So therefore, I'm going to support this recommendation.
Thank you, Clive. Joe, next, please.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing, Clive, about the RPZ. It did seem to me the solution. I know the area as well. And in fact, I've sneakily parked on there. I've got to be honest. I've probably parked really near to where that development's proposed. So I do feel the pain of the residents, and I do appreciate that it is frustrating them. And it's the same in my ward. There's a lot of worry about where people are going to be able to park. Unfortunately, we can't hang our hats on everything around parking. We've got to start looking forward, and it's not, we can't turn down developments on the basis of losing parking spaces. And I think I agree with what was said about the effort that's been put into the presentation, to the appearance of the building as well. And comparing it to the last application, where it did sort of somewhat feel like, a can of sardines, this is not like that, and this is the sort of thing we need. I do appreciate that it's difficult for local residents when you get new development, but I think this is actually fairly restrained. And I suppose the issue of concern I have is around the waste management. It's not going to stop me from supporting this, but I do think I would like to see more evidence that that there is going to be adequate waste management. I'd like maybe a condition that we can see some evidence that this is a workable solution when there's no outside space at all, because there is actually another thing that's flipping annoying to local residents is when other people don't look after sort out their rubbish properly. So I would really like to see some evidence that they've got a plan. It isn't just, oh, they're going to go in that corner. So other than that, I think it's fair enough. The parking, yeah, difficult, I understand, but I think I've got to support it.
Thanks, Joe. Leslie, next.
Right. Well, as everybody said, the number of rooms and the flat itself is reasonably fine. The parking isn't, and that's a big issue as far as I'm concerned. And then the lack of outside space, but also the waste bins. I'm sorry to harp on about waste bins, but if you've got a ramp over 3 or 4 steps, I can just see that if there's only one person in the house, in the flat, then they're not going, and they're small or elderly, they're not going to be able to get that waste bin safely down the ramp. I can see that as being a real problem. So I'm not sure that I'm going to support this.
Okay, thank you. Fee?
Okay, yeah, I think this is quite a nice little development. It actually looks better than what they've got at the moment. I'm not a great fan of your flat roof. So clearly efforts have been made to make it fit in the local environment. The bins aren't ideal, but what else you do on a site like that, I don't know. And as for the parking, well, all I can say is good luck in getting a residence parking zone anywhere, anytime in the next millennia, the way things are going. I speak from experience also. Anyway, but I'll be supporting this. I think it's in the circumstances, it's not a bad development, and I'm happy to support it.
Okay, thank you. It sounds like we're at the point where we can move to a motion. So as chair, I'll propose that we vote on the officer recommendation, which is to grant the application subject to conditions. Does anyone want to second? Mike, I see. Yeah, thank you. I assume that was what your hand was for. So Mike has seconded. So let's go through everyone and vote. So Clive first, please.
4.
4. Thank you, Clive. Fee?
4.
4. Thank you. Joe?
4.
4, thank you. Leslie?
Against.
Against, thank you. Mike?
4.
4, thank you. Ollie?
4.
4, thank you. Sultan?
4.
4, thank you. And I will vote 4 as well. So that's 7-1. The application is granted. And that is the final item on the agenda. So that's the end of the meeting. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you.